Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Economics channel. Tonight, we drift down a long, slow river of grain and gold, following the quiet economic heartbeat of ancient Egypt, a civilization that measured its wealth not in coins but in the steady, patient flooding of the Nile. For thousands of years, an entire society learned to plan, to save, to lend, and to share, long before anyone had ever written the word economy. Scribes counted grain by torchlight. Temples stored surplus like great stone reservoirs of trust, and workers were paid in bread and beer rather than metal. Understanding how Egypt organized its wealth helps us understand something timeless about human beings, our endless, gentle effort to turn uncertainty into order. If you find comfort in these long, unhurried journeys through history, consider leaving the video playing, and perhaps a quiet like or a comment before you drift off, just so more of these calm nights can find their way to you. For now, let your shoulders soften into whatever you're resting on. Let your breathing slow, unhurried, like water easing around a stone. Let your thoughts settle, the way sand settles after a boat has passed. Let's begin. Cluster 1. Origins of the Nile economy. The Nile flooded once a year, and Egypt built its entire economy around that single, patient rhythm. Every summer, dark, silt-rich water spread gently across the fields, and farmers waited, watching the riverbanks the way a merchant might watch a horizon. This flood, called the inundation, was so reliable that early Egyptians organized their calendar entirely around it. Yet one bad flood, too low or too high, could mean a year of hunger for an entire kingdom. There is something deeply human in building a whole civilization around trust in a river's mood, season after season, without complaint. Egyptian farmers never used money in our modern sense, yet they built one of the most sophisticated economies of the ancient world. Instead of coins, grain itself became a kind of currency, measured, stored, and exchanged for goods and labor across the entire Nile Valley. A basket of wheat could pay a debt, settle a dispute, or reward a laborer for a season's work. Still, this system depended entirely on careful counting, and counting depended entirely on trust between neighbors. In this way, a grain of wheat quietly carried the same weight we now give to a coin in a pocket. Imagine standing on the edge of a field in the early morning, watching the floodwaters recede and leave behind a dark, fertile ribbon of soil. Farmers called this black land Kemet, the very word Egyptians used for their own country, as if the soil itself were the nation's true wealth. Beyond it lay the red desert, dry and empty, a constant reminder of how thin the line was between abundance and nothing at all. Even a modest shift in the flood's height could push a household from comfort into hardship within a single season. Perhaps this is why Egyptian life leaned so heavily on patience, on watching, on waiting for a rhythm no one could rush. Long before any king sat on a throne, Egyptian villages had already learned to store surplus grain against lean years. Simple pits and mud brick granaries dotted early settlements, holding wheat and barley set aside from a good harvest. Over time, these humble storage pits grew into the vast state granaries that would later define the kingdom's entire economic backbone. Yet even the earliest farmers understood a simple, timeless truth. Today's abundance is only useful if it survives until tomorrow's need. This is what makes early Egyptian economics so quietly remarkable. A whole civilization built on the discipline of saving, weighing, and measuring became a central economic skill in early Egypt, long before writing was fully developed. Simple balanced scales, carved from stone and wood, allowed traders to compare quantities of grain, metal, or cloth with real precision. Standard measures like the hekat for grain let two strangers agree on a fair exchange without needing to argue over guesswork. Still, disputes over measurement were common enough that later Egyptian law would devote entire sections to punishing dishonest scales. Even in the earliest villages, fairness in trade was already something worth protecting with formal rules. Egypt's economy grew so tightly bound to the Nile that ancient writers described the entire kingdom as the gift of the river. Every institution, from the humblest household to the royal treasury, ultimately depended on the flood arriving on time and at the right height. Officials even kept detailed flood records, comparing each year's water level to the ones before, almost like an ancient economic forecast. Yet no measurement, however careful, could ever fully control a river, and that uncertainty shaped every plan the Egyptians made. There is a quiet lesson here about building steady lives atop forces we can measure but never truly command. Villages along the Nile organized labor around the flood's calendar, working the fields intensely for part of the year and turning to other trades when the waters receded. During the flood season itself, when the land lay underwater, many farmers were called instead to work on royal building projects. This clever rotation meant the same hands that planted wheat in autumn might haul stone for a monument in summer. It also meant that when the flood failed, both farming and construction could stall together, doubling the strain on ordinary households. Even labor itself, in Egypt, moved to the unhurried rhythm of the water. Early Egyptian trade often relied on simple barter, exchanging one useful good directly for another without any coin passing between hands. A potter might trade a set of jars for a sack of barley, and a weaver might trade linen cloth for a basket of dried fish. Over centuries, certain goods, especially grain, copper, and later silver by weight, began functioning as informal standards of value across the whole valley. Yet, without official coinage, every transaction still depended on the honesty and reputation of the people involved. In this way, trust quietly became Egypt's true earliest currency, long before metal coins ever existed. Imagine a small riverside market at dawn, baskets of onions and jars of beer laid out on woven mats along the muddy bank. Traders called out prices in terms of grain equivalents, comparing a fish to so many measures of wheat, a jar of oil to so many measures of barley. Nearby, a scribe might sit quietly, ready to record any larger exchange involving land, animals, or long-term debts. Even here, in the calm ordinariness of a morning market, the seeds of formal Egyptian economic administration were quietly taking root. So much of history, it seems, begins in small, unremarkable places like this one. By the time the first pharaohs unified Upper and Lower Egypt, the kingdom already possessed a working economic language of measures, grain values, and local trade customs. This unification allowed rulers to gather resources from across the entire Nile Valley into a single, centralized system. Local surpluses from the south could now support building projects or feed workers in the north, and vice versa. Yet, uniting these local economies also required a much larger, more formal system of counting, recording, and storing wealth. Over the coming centuries, that need would quietly give birth to some of the world's earliest true administrative institutions. Cluster 2: Weights, Deben, and the idea of value. Ancient Egypt never minted coins for most of its long history. yet it still needed a way to compare the value of very different goods. The answer was the deben, a fixed unit of weight, usually of copper, silver, or gold, used to price everything from a bed to a slave's labor contract. A single transaction might be described as worth 5 deben of copper, even if no actual metal changed hands that day. Still, without coins to carry, most people settled debts instead with grain, cloth, livestock, or labor equal to that value. In this way, the deben worked almost like an invisible ledger line, quietly present in every fair exchange. Egyptian scribes recorded prices in deben with remarkable consistency across many centuries, giving historians today a rare window into ancient economic life. A goat might be valued at a certain number of copper deben, while a fine linen garment could be worth many times more in silver deben. These records show us not coins jingling in a pocket, but careful comparisons written onto papyrus or broken pottery. Yet prices were never perfectly fixed, and local shortages or abundant harvests could shift values noticeably from town to town. Even without money as we know it, Egypt had already discovered the shifting, human rhythm of a marketplace. Silver was often more valuable than gold in early Egypt, a detail that surprises many people used to modern assumptions about precious metals. Gold was relatively abundant, mined from the deserts and from Nubia to the south, while silver had to be imported from distant lands. This scarcity made silver a prized measure of value, sometimes used specifically for larger or more prestigious transactions. Even something as simple as which metal counted as precious depended entirely on where a resource had to travel from. Value, it turns out, has always leaned as much on distance and effort as on shine. Imagine a merchant carefully placing small weighted stones onto one side of a bronze balance scale, watching the beam settle level with a promised measure of grain. These weights, often shaped like animals or simple domes, were carved with painstaking precision to match official standards set by the state. Tampering with a weight, even shaving the smallest sliver from its edge, was treated as a serious offense against the whole community's trust. Yet cheating still happened often enough that inspectors periodically checked marketplace weights against official templates kept in temples. Fair measure, it seems, has always required someone quietly standing guard over honesty. This is what makes Egyptian economic life so quietly fascinating, an entire kingdom running smoothly for millennia without ever needing to strike a single coin. Instead of coins, Egypt relied on trusted institutions, careful scribes, and shared units like the deben to keep transactions fair and consistent. Only very late in Egyptian history, under foreign rulers, did true minted coins begin to circulate widely along the Nile. Until then, value lived quietly in written records, in weighed metal, and in grain stored patiently behind temple walls. Perhaps money was never really about metal at all, but about shared, careful agreement. Land itself, though rarely sold outright in early Egypt, still carried a clear economic value tracked closely by royal administrators. Most farmland technically belonged to the king or to powerful temples, worked by farmers who paid a portion of their harvest as a kind of rent. These arrangements were recorded meticulously, field by field, so that officials always knew exactly how much grain a region owed each season. Yet farmers who worked the same plot for generations often felt a deep, informal claim to that land. Whatever the official records said, ownership, even then, lived somewhere between a written record and a lifetime of quiet, patient labor. Egyptian households sometimes used long-term contracts to lend grain or tools to neighbors, with careful terms written down by a local scribe. A farmer might borrow seed grain before planting season, promising to repay a slightly larger amount once the harvest came in. This small margin functioned almost like an ancient interest rate, compensating the lender for the risk of an uncertain flood. Yet if the harvest failed, the burden of that extra grain could push an already struggling family deeper into hardship. Even in the gentlest of economies, debt has always carried this quiet, double-edged weight. Contracts in ancient Egypt were often witnessed by several people, their names carefully listed alongside the agreement itself on papyrus or pottery shards. This practice meant that a broken promise wasn't just a private matter between two people, but a small failure witnessed by an entire community. Scribes trained for years to write these documents clearly, since a poorly worded contract could lead to costly disputes later. Yet, even the clearest contract still depended on both sides honoring their word once the ink had dried. Perhaps this is why so much of Egyptian law quietly circled back to the value of a kept promise. Imagine a quiet scribal office at the edge of a temple courtyard, reed pens resting beside pots of black and red ink. Here, young scribes copied economic records for years, learning to write grain totals, tax lists, and labor contracts with exact, practiced strokes. Becoming a scribe was one of the few paths to real economic security in Egypt, free from the harshest physical labor of the fields. Yet even scribes depended entirely on the same uncertain river that shaped every other Egyptian livelihood. Knowledge, it seems, has always offered comfort but never quite complete escape from nature's rhythm. By the height of the Old Kingdom, Egypt had developed one of the most detailed record-keeping economies in the ancient world, tracking grain, land, and labor with remarkable precision. Entire offices existed simply to count, compare, and store information about the kingdom's wealth, year after year, flood after flood. This careful bookkeeping allowed pharaohs to plan enormous projects, confident they knew roughly how much grain and labor the kingdom could spare. Yet all of this precision still rested, in the end, on the same unpredictable river that had shaped Egypt since its earliest villages. Order and uncertainty, it seems, have always lived side by side in every great economy. Cluster 3. Temples as the kingdom's banks. Egyptian temples were never only places of worship. They were also some of the largest economic institutions in the ancient world. Temples owned vast farmland, storehouses, workshops, and even fleets of boats, employing thousands of people across the kingdom. Grain, oil, and cloth flowed into temple storerooms as offerings, taxes, and rents, then flowed back out as wages, rations, and charity. Yet, this enormous wealth also made temples powerful economic players, sometimes rivaling the pharaoh's own treasury and influence. In this way, faith and finance quietly grew into the very same institution. Some temple storerooms held enough grain to feed entire regions for months, functioning almost like a national reserve bank of food. In lean years, when the Nile's flood came late or low, these stores could be released to prevent widespread famine. Priests and administrators carefully tracked every sack that entered or left, recording it alongside religious offerings on the same ledgers. Yet drawing down these reserves too quickly could leave a temple and its dependents dangerously exposed if the following year proved difficult too. Even sacred abundance, it seems, required the same careful patience as any farmer's harvest. Temple workshops produced linen, beer, bread, and jewelry on a massive scale, much of it destined for trade rather than ritual use alone. Skilled weavers and brewers worked within temple walls, their labor recorded and rewarded, much like workers in any large modern enterprise. Surplus goods from these workshops were sometimes exchanged with foreign traders, quietly linking religious institutions to distant economies. Yet, temple workers still depended on the same grain rations and careful accounting as everyone else in the kingdom. This is what makes temple economics so quietly remarkable. Devotion and commerce, woven into a single, unhurried system. Imagine walking through a temple's outer courtyards, past rows of granaries taller than a person, their mud brick walls warm from the afternoon sun. Inside, scribes moved quietly between sacks of wheat and barley, updating totals on broken pottery used as everyday notepads. Priests, meanwhile, prepared offerings in an inner hall, unaware, or perhaps entirely aware, that the temple's true power lay as much in these granaries as in any prayer. Even holiness, in Egypt, needed a full storeroom standing quietly behind it. Perhaps sacred trust and economic trust have always been closer cousins than we like to admit. Temples also acted as lenders, offering grain to farmers in difficult years in exchange for a larger repayment once the harvest improved. This arrangement functioned much like an early form of banking, smoothing out the unevenness of Egypt's flood-dependent economy. A struggling household might survive a poor season only because a nearby temple was willing to extend this kind of patient credit. Yet years of repeated borrowing could slowly tie a family's labor and loyalty ever closer to the temple that had helped them. Even kindness, in economics, has always carried this quiet, complicated weight. Some of Egypt's largest temples employed more workers than many small cities, overseeing farmland, herds, workshops, and fleets of trading boats all at once. The great temple complexes of Thebes, for example, controlled enormous stretches of land along the Nile at the height of their influence. Managing such an operation required layers of officials, scribes, and overseers, each responsible for a small piece of a very large economic machine. Yet this concentration of wealth sometimes worried pharaohs, wary of any institution rivaling the throne's own economic power. Even in ancient Egypt, the balance between faith and state was a delicate, ever-shifting thing. Offerings brought to temples were rarely wasted once the religious ceremony had passed. Instead, priests carefully redistributed food and goods back into the wider economy. Bread and beer offered before a statue in the morning might feed temple workers by afternoon and be sold in a nearby market by evening. This quiet cycle meant that religious devotion directly supported the livelihoods of bakers, brewers, farmers, and craftsmen alike. Yet keeping this cycle balanced required careful management, since too much waste could quietly drain a temple's resources over time. Even something as simple as a loaf of bread could travel a surprisingly long economic journey. Imagine a quiet evening at a temple's rear gate, where baskets of leftover offerings were handed out to widows, orphans, and elderly workers waiting patiently in line. This informal charity, though never called by that name, softened some of the harshest edges of Egyptian economic life. Temples, in this way, functioned as an early social safety net, long before any formal concept of welfare existed. Yet this generosity still depended entirely on the temple's own economic health, which could rise and fall with the Nile's mood. Even compassion, it seems, has always needed a full granary standing behind it. This is what makes temple economics so quietly haunting, an institution built to honor the eternal, resting entirely on the yearly uncertainty of a river's flood. Priests prayed for a good inundation, not only for spiritual reasons, but for very practical, economic ones as well. A poor flood threatened not just farmers, but the temple's granaries, workshops, and charitable giving all at once. Yet this shared vulnerability may have quietly bound Egyptian society together, uniting farmer and priest under the same anxious hope each summer. Perhaps even eternity in Egypt learned to wait patiently on the rhythm of the water. Over time, some temples grew so economically powerful that later pharaohs worked carefully to limit their independence, redirecting land and labor back toward the royal treasury. This slow tug-of-war between temple and throne would shape Egyptian politics for centuries, quietly playing out across tax records and land grants. Yet even at their most powerful, temples never fully replaced the pharaoh's ultimate claim over the kingdom's land and labor. Still, the memory of temple wealth lingered, a reminder of how deeply intertwined religion and economy had become. In the end, both temple and throne depended on the very same fragile, generous river. Cluster 4, taxation, and the scribes who counted everything. Taxation in ancient Egypt rarely involved money changing hands. Instead, officials measured fields, counted livestock, and assessed a portion owed directly in grain. Every 2 years or so, surveyors walked the land after the flood receded, recording the size and quality of each farmer's plot. From these careful measurements, scribes calculated exactly how much grain a household owed to the state that season. Yet, a flood that shifted riverbanks could quietly erase old boundaries, forcing surveyors to remeasure and resettle disputes each time. Even the land itself, in Egypt, refused to hold perfectly still for long. Egyptian tax records were kept with astonishing detail, listing individual farmers, their fields, their harvests, and the exact grain owed to the state. Some surviving papyri show entire villages accounted for, name by name, field by field, season after season. This level of bureaucratic precision, thousands of years before modern accounting, still impresses historians studying these fragile documents today. Yet behind every tidy total lay the quiet, human reality of farmers hoping the flood had been kind enough to leave something over. Numbers, even ancient ones, always carried a human story folded inside them. Scribes held a uniquely respected position in Egyptian society, prized for their ability to read, write, and calculate with precision. An old Egyptian teaching text even praised the scribal life, contrasting it favorably against the exhausting work of farmers, soldiers, and laborers. Becoming a scribe required years of disciplined training, copying texts and calculations over and over until the skill became second nature.
Yet scribes, too, depended entirely on the kingdom's economic health, since a failing harvest meant less grain for everyone, including them.
Even privilege, in Egypt, rested quietly on the same uncertain river as everything else. Imagine a young scribe in training, seated cross-legged on a reed mat, carefully copying columns of grain totals from an older, more experienced teacher. Mistakes were corrected patiently, but firmly, since a single miscounted total could distort an entire village's tax record. Over years, these students absorbed not just writing, but the deep discipline of careful, honest counting. Even a small error, multiplied across a whole kingdom, could quietly ripple into real hardship for someone far away. Precision, it seems, has always been a quiet form of kindness toward strangers. Tax collectors were not always welcomed warmly, and Egyptian art occasionally shows farmers pleading or even fleeing when officials arrived to assess their harvest. Records describe farmers hiding grain or understating their harvest, hoping to soften the burden of what they owed. Officials, in turn, developed careful cross-checking methods, comparing field surveys against reported harvests to catch obvious discrepancies. Yet, even the most careful system still left room for quiet negotiation, bribery, or simple human sympathy between neighbors. Even in the most orderly economy, people have always found small, human cracks to slip through. This is what makes Egyptian taxation so quietly fascinating, a system built almost entirely on trust in careful measurement, decades before formal currency existed. Grain taxes fed the royal treasury, temple storerooms, and the vast workforces needed for building projects across the kingdom. Without this steady flow of counted, measured grain, none of Egypt's great monuments could ever have been built at all. Yet every measured sack also represented a farmer's labor, patience, and hope for a season that had, once again, gone well enough. Behind every great monument stood a quiet mountain of carefully counted grain. Egyptian officials sometimes granted tax relief after a poor flood, formally reducing the grain owed by struggling villages that season. Surviving records mention such adjustments, showing that the system, however strict, still bent occasionally to accommodate real hardship. These decisions required careful judgment from local officials, weighing the kingdom's needs against a village's genuine ability to pay. Yet, relief in one region sometimes meant a heavier burden elsewhere, as the kingdom's overall needs rarely shrank along with a bad harvest. Fairness, even then, was a delicate balance rather than a fixed, simple rule. Imagine an official standing at the edge of a flooded field, comparing this year's water line against marks carved into a nearby stone nilometer. These nilometers, built along the riverbanks, allowed Egypt to measure flood height with real precision, feeding directly into tax calculations for the year ahead. A high, generous flood might mean a heavier tax owed, while a weak flood often meant relief was quietly granted instead. Even taxation, in Egypt, listened closely to the river's own quiet announcement each summer. Perhaps no other ancient economy tied its fairness so directly to nature's own instrument. Beyond grain, Egyptians paid taxes and labor as well, a system historians now call corvée labor, obligating citizens to work on state projects for a set number of days each year. This labor built canals, roads, temples, and monuments, effectively functioning as a tax, paid in effort rather than goods. Skilled workers might be assigned specialized tasks, while others hauled stone, dug canals, or maintained irrigation channels. Yet this obligation could still fall heavily on ordinary households, especially during years when farming itself demanded every spare hand. Even time and effort, in Egypt, were carefully counted as a form of wealth. Taken together, Egypt's grain taxes and labor obligations formed one of history's earliest large-scale systems of public finance, entirely without coined money. This system fed workers, funded monuments, supported temples, and sustained a royal court, all through careful measurement and record-keeping. It is a striking reminder that complex economies do not require metal coins, only trust, structure, and patient administration. Yet every ledger entry, however tidy, still rested on the same fragile hope that the Nile would rise just enough, and no more. Order, in Egypt, was always a quiet negotiation with an uncontrollable river. Cluster 5: Wages, Workers, and the Builders of Monuments. Contrary to old legends, the Great Pyramids were not built by enslaved masses, but largely by paid laborers organized into structured, well-fed work crews. Archaeologists have found entire villages built to house these workers, complete with bakeries, breweries, and medical care nearby. Laborers received rations of bread, beer, and other goods as regular wages for their physically demanding work. Yet the work itself remained grueling, seasonal, and dependent on the same careful grain accounting that governed the rest of the kingdom. Even Egypt's most towering monuments rested, quite literally, on carefully measured loaves of bread. Workers on royal projects were often organized into teams with playful, competitive names inscribed proudly onto blocks of stone as they worked. Names like Friends of Khufu or similar team titles suggest a surprising sense of pride and rivalry among these laborers. This organization allowed overseers to track productivity, assign rations fairly, and maintain order across thousands of workers at once. Yet behind this pride lay real physical strain, and records show workers occasionally injured or exhausted by the demanding pace. Even ancient labor, it seems, balanced genuine pride against very real human limits. The village of Deir el-Medina housed skilled workers who built royal tombs, and its ruins have given historians an extraordinarily detailed record of daily economic life. Workers there received regular grain wages, and surviving documents record complaints when those wages arrived late or fell short. In one notable case, workers organized what may be history's earliest recorded labor strike, refusing to work until overdue rations were delivered. Yet even this bold protest unfolded calmly, workers simply sitting down and waiting rather than resorting to violence. Even in ancient Egypt, patience itself could become a quiet form of protest. Imagine the narrow streets of Deir el-Medina at dusk, workers returning home after a long day carving royal tombs deep into the desert cliffs. Grain rations waited at the village storehouse, carefully measured out according to each worker's rank and family size. Some evenings, arguments broke out over uneven distribution, quickly settled by local officials keeping careful written records. Yet most days ended simply, with bread, beer, and quiet conversation among neighbors who had shared this unusual, secretive craft for generations. Even skilled, secretive work, in the end, rested on the same humble grain as everything else. Wages in ancient Egypt were rarely uniform, varying by skill, rank, and the importance of a worker's role within a project. A master craftsman might receive several times the grain ration of an unskilled laborer hauling stone or mixing plaster. This layered system reflected a broader Egyptian belief that skill and responsibility deserved greater reward, much as in economies today. Yet even the highest paid workers remained dependent on the same uncertain harvest that shaped every household's fortune. Even skill, it seems, could soften hardship, but never fully escape it. This is what makes ancient Egyptian labor so quietly remarkable. Enormous monuments raised not by desperate slaves, but by organized, rationed, occasionally striking workers. The scale of these projects required careful planning around harvest cycles, since most large construction slowed sharply during planting and growing seasons. Officials coordinated labor much like a modern project manager might coordinate a workforce across shifting seasonal demands. Yet no amount of planning could fully protect workers from the fatigue, injury, or occasional shortages that came with such enormous undertakings. Even the grandest ambition in Egypt moved at the unhurried pace of human endurance. Egyptian medical texts describe treatments for workplace injuries, suggesting organized care existed for laborers hurt while building monuments or working in mines. Physicians attached to work crews treated broken bones, cuts, and exhaustion, keeping detailed notes on symptoms and remedies. This medical support represents an early, practical recognition that a healthy workforce was itself a valuable economic resource. Yet medicine at the time remained limited, and serious injuries could still end a worker's ability to earn a living. Even care, however imperfect, softened some of labor's harshest, most human edges. Imagine an overseer walking quietly along a line of workers hauling a massive stone block on wooden sledges, calling out a steady, rhythmic chant to keep everyone's pace together. Water and grain waited at set intervals along the route, carefully rationed to keep the crew steady through the heat of the day. Coordinating hundreds of workers required patience, discipline, and a deep trust that rations promised would actually arrive. Yet even a single delayed delivery could ripple through morale across an entire crew within hours. Even stone, it seems, moved only as fast as trust allowed it to. Female workers, though less documented than men, played real economic roles in ancient Egypt, particularly in textile production, brewing, and household management. Records show women receiving grain wages for weaving linen, an industry vital enough to support both domestic use and international trade. Some women even managed household finances independently, buying, selling, and lending within their communities. Yet broader economic and legal power still generally favored men, especially in higher administrative and priestly roles. Even so, the quiet economic labor of Egyptian women wove itself steadily into the kingdom's daily life. Taken together, Egypt's labor system reveals an economy built on measured fairness rather than pure coercion, however imperfect that fairness sometimes proved. Rations, rank, medical care, and even occasional strikes suggest workers were seen as valuable participants, not merely disposable hands. This structure allowed Egypt to sustain enormous, multi-generational building projects without collapsing under their own demands. Yet the system's fairness always depended on the same uncertain harvest that shaped every other part of Egyptian life. Even human effort, in the end, bent quietly to the patient will of the river. Cluster 6, Trade Routes to Nubia, Punt, and beyond. Egypt's wealth extended far beyond its own fields, reaching south into Nubia and further still toward the mysterious land the Egyptians called Punt. Expeditions returned from Punt carrying incense, ebony, ivory, and even exotic animals, treasures unavailable anywhere within Egypt itself. These journeys, recorded in temple inscriptions, were treated as major economic and political achievements worth celebrating for generations. Yet reaching Punt required long, difficult travel by land and sea, making every successful expedition a genuine economic gamble. Even distant, half-legendary lands quietly shaped the everyday luxuries of Egyptian life. Nubia, to Egypt's south, supplied enormous quantities of gold, so much that Egyptian rulers sometimes referred to it as the land of gold itself. This gold funded royal treasuries, temple decorations, and diplomatic gifts sent to foreign rulers across the ancient Near East. Egypt maintained fortresses and trading posts along the Nile's southern reaches, specifically to control and protect this valuable flow. Yet, controlling Nubia also required constant military and diplomatic attention, since access to gold was never entirely guaranteed. Even glittering wealth, it seems, demanded a steady, watchful hand to keep it flowing. Egyptian traders exchanged grain, linen, and manufactured goods for cedar wood from the distant coastal city of Byblos, since Egypt itself had little quality timber. This cedar became essential for shipbuilding, furniture, and the great ceremonial barges used in royal and religious rituals. Trade relationships with Byblos lasted for centuries, evolving from simple exchange into more complex diplomatic partnerships. Yet these relationships could strain during times of political upheaval, occasionally disrupting Egypt's access to this vital resource. Even a single type of wood could quietly bind two distant civilizations together. Imagine a fleet of Egyptian ships gliding along the coast toward Byblos, their holds filled with grain, papyrus, and finely woven linen destined for trade. Sailors navigated by familiar landmarks, trusting routes passed down through generations of careful, patient seafaring knowledge. On arrival, Egyptian traders negotiated carefully with local merchants, exchanging goods measured against agreed values rather than any shared currency. Yet every voyage carried real risk, from storms at sea to shifting political alliances on distant shores. Even trade, in ancient times, required a quiet, steady kind of courage. Egypt's trade network extended eastward too, connecting to Sinai's turquoise and copper mines, worked by expeditions sent specifically to extract these valuable materials. These mining expeditions required careful logistics, transporting food, water, and tools deep into harsh desert terrain. Turquoise, prized for jewelry and ornamentation, became a small but steady contributor to Egypt's broader economic wealth.
Yet mining expeditions demanded enormous organizational effort for a resource that, however beautiful, remained mostly ornamental rather than essential.
Even beauty, it seems, has always carried its own quiet economic cost. This is what makes Egyptian trade so quietly gripping. A civilization reaching confidently outward across deserts and seas, while its entire foundation rested on one single, unpredictable river. Foreign goods flowed steadily into Egypt, precisely because its domestic economy remained stable enough to fund these ambitious expeditions. Grain surpluses, carefully counted and stored, ultimately financed voyages to lands most Egyptians would never personally see. Yet this outward reach always remained secondary to the quiet, constant work of farming along the Nile itself. Even the widest trade networks, in the end, grew from the humblest fields.
Egyptian trading expeditions sometimes included artists and scribes specifically tasked with recording unfamiliar plants, animals, and peoples encountered along the way.
These records, carved into temple walls, celebrated successful voyages while also documenting genuinely new economic knowledge for future reference. Such careful documentation suggests Egyptians viewed trade not merely as transaction, but as something worth remembering and studying. Yet these accounts, however detailed, still reflected an Egyptian perspective, often emphasizing triumph over the more difficult, uncertain realities of the journey. Even ancient records, like modern ones, told their story with a particular, hopeful slant. Imagine an Egyptian expedition returning triumphantly along the Nile, boats laden with incense trees, exotic animals, and baskets of unfamiliar spices from the land of Punt. Crowds gathered at the riverbank, drawn by curiosity and quiet economic hope, since these goods would soon enrich temples, markets, and royal courts alike. Priests prepared to record the expedition's success in stone, ensuring the achievement would outlast the memory of any single voyage. Yet few among the crowd fully grasped the danger and uncertainty the sailors had faced to bring these treasures home. Even celebrated wealth, it seems, often hides a quieter story of risk. Trade with the wider Mediterranean world grew steadily over time, connecting Egypt to Crete, Cyprus, and eventually the early Greek world. Egyptian linen, papyrus, and grain traveled outward, while copper, wine, and fine pottery flowed back along these same routes. These exchanges slowly wove Egypt into a much larger web of ancient economies, each depending on the others in quiet, complex ways. Yet distance and unfamiliar customs still made these long-range trades riskier and less predictable than exchanges closer to home. Even the widest economic webs, it seems, were built one cautious voyage at a time. Taken together, Egypt's trade routes reveal a civilization confident enough to reach far beyond its borders, yet careful enough to keep its foundation firmly rooted at home. Gold from Nubia, cedar from Byblos, incense from Punt, and copper from Sinai all flowed into a single, centrally managed economic system. This careful balance between outward ambition and inward stability allowed Egypt to sustain its wealth across many centuries. Yet every distant treasure, in the end, still depended on the same quiet grain fields that had always sustained the kingdom. Even the grandest reach, it seems, never forgot where it began. Cluster 7: Debt, Granaries, and Surviving Famine. Egypt's granaries served as the kingdom's true insurance policy, holding back surplus grain from good years to soften the impact of the bad ones that inevitably followed. State officials calculated how much grain to store based on years of careful flood and harvest records, planning several seasons ahead whenever possible. This foresight allowed Egypt to survive occasional low floods without descending immediately into famine. Yet even the largest granaries had limits, and several consecutive poor floods could still strain the entire system dangerously. Even the most careful planning, it seems, could only stretch patience so far. One especially difficult period, later remembered in Egyptian tradition, describes a long stretch of weak Nile floods that strained the kingdom's granaries severely. Later texts describe officials struggling to manage dwindling grain reserves, rationing carefully to prevent the worst of the hardship from spreading. Whether describing a single dramatic famine or a longer, harder era, these accounts reveal genuine anxiety about the fragility of Egypt's food security. Yet, Egyptian administration, however strained, still managed to hold the kingdom together through careful, patient rationing. Even in hardship, the discipline of counting and sharing carried Egypt through. Local governors, called nomarchs, sometimes boasted in tomb inscriptions of personally feeding their districts during difficult famine years, distributing grain from their own private stores. These claims, whether fully accurate or partly exaggerated, reveal how highly Egyptian society valued generosity during times of scarcity. A governor's reputation, and even his path to a respected afterlife, could rest partly on how well he had cared for his people economically. Yet such generosity also reinforced a governor's local power, tying loyalty closely to whoever controlled the grain. Even kindness, in ancient Egypt, quietly reinforced the structures of authority around it. Imagine a difficult season when the floodwaters barely rose above the riverbanks, fields cracking under a thin, disappointing layer of silt. Officials moved quickly to open local granaries, carefully measuring out rations to stretch the remaining grain across as many households as possible. Families adjusted quietly, eating smaller portions, trading what little they had, leaning on neighbors and local temples for support. Yet even the most careful rationing could not fully erase the quiet anxiety of watching the horizon for the next year's flood. Even resilience in Egypt was built from many small, patient sacrifices. Debt during hard years often took the form of grain loans, farmers borrowing seed or food with a promise to repay once conditions improved. Temples and wealthier households acted as informal lenders, extending credit that could mean the difference between survival and true hardship. These arrangements, recorded carefully by scribes, functioned as an early, humane form of economic safety net during difficult times. Yet years of repeated borrowing could quietly deepen a family's dependence on whoever had extended them credit. Even generosity, over time, could slowly reshape the balance of power between neighbors. This is what makes Egyptian famine management so quietly moving, a society that met scarcity not with chaos, but with careful counting, rationing, and shared sacrifice. Records from difficult periods still show functioning administration, grain distribution, and organized labor, even amid real hardship. This resilience suggests deep cultural habits of planning and patience, built up over centuries of living beside an unpredictable river. Yet no amount of planning could fully erase the real suffering that difficult years inevitably brought to ordinary families. Even the calmest historical account should never forget the quiet hardship living underneath it.
Egyptian officials sometimes redistributed land and grain debts after particularly difficult periods, effectively resetting some households' financial burdens to prevent long-term collapse.
These adjustments, though not universal, suggest an awareness that unchecked debt could quietly unravel the kingdom's broader stability. Similar ideas would appear much later in other ancient economies, hinting at a shared, timeless understanding of debt's dangers. Yet such resets remain the exception rather than the rule, and many households still carried debt burdens for years. Even ancient economies, it seems, wrestled with the same delicate balance between mercy and order. Imagine an elderly farmer recounting, late in life, the hardest flood season he had ever survived, describing thin harvests and careful, shared meals with neighbors. His grandchildren listened quietly, perhaps only half believing how close the whole village had once come to true hunger. Such stories, passed down across generations, likely shaped Egypt's deep cultural respect for careful saving and steady, patient administration. Yet each generation still faced its own uncertain flood, its own quiet gamble with the river's mood. Even memory, it seems, could only partly prepare a family for what came next. Granary administration required an entire hierarchy of officials, from local overseers counting individual village stores, to national officials tracking totals across the whole kingdom. This layered system allowed Egypt to move grain relatively efficiently from surplus regions to areas facing genuine shortage. Such coordination, remarkable for its time, prevented the kind of severe regional famines that plagued less organized ancient societies.
Yet moving grain across long distances still required time, boats, and labor, all of which could be strained during a genuine crisis.
Even the best system, it seems, still moved at the patient pace of the river itself. Taken together, Egypt's approach to famine and debt reveals a civilization that treated scarcity as an expected, recurring challenge rather than a rare catastrophe. Careful storage, structured lending, and organized redistribution allowed Egypt to endure difficult periods that might have collapsed less prepared societies. This patient, methodical approach to hardship echoes quietly through thousands of years of Egyptian history. Yet every solution, however clever, still ultimately depended on the same uncertain, life-giving river that shaped everything else in Egypt. Even survival, in the end, was something the Nile and its people worked out together. Cluster 8: Luxury goods, gold, and the language of status. Gold held a unique place in Egyptian economic and religious life, believed to be the very flesh of the gods, untouchable by ordinary tarnish or decay. This sacred association made gold especially prized for royal jewelry, funerary masks, and temple decoration across Egyptian history. Nubian mines supplied much of this gold, flowing steadily into royal workshops where skilled artisans transformed it into dazzling ceremonial objects.
Yet gold's abundance in Egypt also meant its value depended heavily on demand from foreign trading partners eager to acquire it.
Even a sacred metal, it seems, still answered to the quiet logic of trade.
Egyptian royal tombs, when discovered largely intact, revealed staggering quantities of gold, jewelry, and imported luxury goods, reflecting the true scale of royal economic power.
Such treasures included furniture inlaid with ebony and ivory, alongside jewelry set with lapis lazuli imported from as far away as Afghanistan. These objects reveal trade networks stretching thousands of miles beyond Egypt's own borders, connecting the Nile Valley to distant, unfamiliar economies. Yet such extraordinary wealth remained reserved almost entirely for royalty, standing in sharp contrast to the modest grain rations of ordinary workers. Even shared prosperity in ancient Egypt still bent unevenly toward the throne. Fine linen became one of Egypt's most valued exports, prized across the ancient world for its remarkable quality and skilled craftsmanship. Weavers spun and dyed linen through careful, labor-intensive processes, producing cloth fine enough to rival any luxury good of its time. This linen traveled outward along Egypt's trade routes, exchanged for timber, wine, and precious metals from distant lands. Yet, producing such fine cloth demanded enormous skilled labor, tying the luxury economy closely to the patient work of ordinary weavers. Even elegance, it seems, was quietly built from countless hours of careful, unhurried craft. Imagine a royal workshop filled with the soft clinking of gold being carefully shaped into delicate jewelry. Artisans bent low over their work by lamplight. Each piece, whether a pendant, ring, or ceremonial collar, represented hours of painstaking labor, transforming raw imported material into a genuine status symbol. Nearby, scribes recorded exactly how much gold and precious stone had entered the workshop, ensuring nothing valuable slipped away unaccounted for. Yet even here, amid such beauty, the same careful counting that governed grain also governed gold. Wealth, it seems, was never allowed to wander far from watchful, patient record-keeping. Status in Egyptian society was expressed clearly through material goods, from the quality of one's linen to the number of servants or amount of jewelry displayed. Tomb paintings often depicted the deceased surrounded by fine goods, reflecting genuine pride in economic achievement even beyond death. This visible display of wealth reinforced social hierarchy, signaling clearly who held economic and political power within a community.
Yet even the wealthiest Egyptians remained dependent on the same grain-based economy underlying every other household's survival.
Even luxury, in the end, rested quietly upon the same humble foundation as everyone else's daily bread. This is what makes Egyptian luxury trade so quietly fascinating. treasures fit for gods and kings, built entirely from an economy rooted in grain, mud, and careful counting. Gold, ivory, and fine linen traveled outward and inward along trade routes funded ultimately by disciplined agricultural surplus. Without a stable grain economy at home, none of Egypt's dazzling luxury trade could ever have taken root. Yet luxury also created sharp contrasts, reminding ordinary Egyptians just how far royal wealth stood above their own modest, patient lives. Even glittering treasure, it seems, cast a long and quiet shadow. Egyptian diplomats sometimes exchanged extraordinarily lavish gifts with foreign rulers, part of careful economic and political relationships spanning the ancient Near East. Letters between Egyptian pharaohs and foreign kings, preserved on clay tablets, describe gold, horses, and luxury goods traded as diplomatic gestures. These exchanges functioned almost like an ancient form of international relations, smoothing alliances through carefully calculated generosity.
Yet such gifts also carried real economic weight, sometimes straining royal treasuries during politically sensitive periods.
Even friendship between kingdoms, it seems, required its own careful, patient accounting. Imagine a foreign delegation arriving at the Egyptian court, gifts of horses and fine textiles offered in exchange for promised shipments of Egyptian gold. Scribes on both sides recorded these exchanges meticulously, ensuring neither party could later dispute what had been promised. Such careful diplomacy reveals how deeply intertwined economics and politics had become across the ancient world. Yet beneath the polished ceremony lay the same quiet, practical concerns familiar to any trader haggling in a village market. Even grand diplomacy, in the end, rested on the same patient art of fair exchange. Luxury goods eventually found their way even into modest households through smaller imitations, cheaper jewelry, or dyed cloth mimicking more expensive royal fashions. This gentle trickle-down effect allowed ordinary Egyptians a small taste of the aesthetic values celebrated so lavishly at the royal court. Craftsmen catering to this modest demand created an entire secondary economy built around affordable versions of elite luxury. Yet, the gap between royal treasure and household imitation remained vast, a quiet reminder of Egypt's steep economic hierarchy. Even imitation, in its own modest way, revealed how deeply admired that royal wealth truly was. Taken together, Egypt's luxury economy reveals a civilization capable of extraordinary craftsmanship and long-distance trade, built entirely upon a disciplined agricultural foundation. Gold, linen, and imported treasures flowed through careful channels of production, taxation, and diplomacy, reaching from royal tombs down to humble village markets. This layered economy allowed beauty and status to flourish without ever fully escaping the patient rhythms of grain and river. Yet luxury, however dazzling, remained only the visible surface of a much deeper, quieter economic story. Even gold, in the end, owed its shine to the mud and grain beneath it. Cluster 9: Administration, Viziers, and the Royal Treasury. At the very top of Egypt's economic system stood the vizier, a powerful official who oversaw taxation, granaries, construction, and much of the kingdom's daily administration. Ancient texts describe the vizier's duties in remarkable detail, listing responsibilities from settling legal disputes to managing royal building projects. This single office effectively functioned as treasury minister, chief judge, and construction manager combined into one demanding role. Yet such enormous responsibility required a deep, patient understanding of the kingdom's economic rhythms, especially the ever-important flood cycle. Even the most powerful official in Egypt still ultimately answered to the river's quiet schedule. Egyptian viziers were instructed, according to surviving texts, to treat petitioners fairly regardless of their wealth or social standing, a striking early expression of economic justice. These instructions warned specifically against favoritism toward the wealthy, urging careful, impartial judgment in every economic dispute. Whether this ideal was always achieved in practice remains uncertain, but its very existence reveals a genuine cultural value placed on fairness. Yet enforcing such fairness across an entire kingdom required layers of honest officials, not always easy to guarantee. Even ideals in ancient Egypt needed careful, ongoing effort to become lived reality. The royal treasury managed vast stores of grain, gold, linen, and other goods, functioning as the economic heart of the entire kingdom. Treasury officials tracked incoming taxes, outgoing wages, and reserves set aside for building projects, military campaigns, or diplomatic gifts. This careful management allowed pharaohs to plan ambitious projects with real confidence in the kingdom's available resources. Yet, treasury officials also faced constant pressure to balance competing demands, from temple funding to military needs to royal luxury. Even royal wealth, it seems, required the same patient balancing act as any careful household budget. Imagine a treasury official standing before towering shelves of sealed jars and neatly stacked papyrus scrolls, each representing a portion of the kingdom's carefully counted wealth. Every entry and exit of goods passed through his careful review, cross-checked against reports from granaries and workshops across the land. Such meticulous oversight allowed Egypt's central government to respond quickly to shortages, surpluses, or sudden royal demands. Yet, even the most organized treasury still depended entirely on honest reporting from officials scattered across a very large kingdom. Even centralized wealth, it seems, rested on countless small, quiet acts of trust. Local governors, or nomarchs, managed their own regional economies somewhat independently, collecting taxes and organizing labor within their districts before reporting upward to central authorities. This layered structure allowed Egypt to manage an enormous, geographically stretched kingdom without every decision passing directly through the royal court. Successful nomarchs were often celebrated in tomb inscriptions for their fair, effective economic management of their districts. Yet, powerful nomarchs could also become political rivals to the throne, especially during periods of weak central authority. Even good administration, it seems, could quietly shift into an entirely different kind of power. This is what makes Egyptian administration so quietly impressive. A kingdom stretching hundreds of miles along a single river, managed through careful layers of local and central officials. Grain, labor, and goods moved steadily between village, temple, region, and royal court, coordinated through consistent record-keeping practices. This system allowed Egypt to sustain enormous multi-generational projects, from pyramids to temples to elaborate irrigation networks. Yet maintaining this coordination required constant vigilance, since even small administrative failures could ripple outward across the kingdom. Even vast ancient bureaucracy, it seems, depended on countless small, careful human efforts. Periods of weakened central authority in Egyptian history often coincided with economic strain, droughts,
or disputed successions, showing how closely political stability and economic health were linked.
During such intermediate periods, regional governors sometimes acted almost independently, managing local economies with little oversight from a distant, weakened throne. This fragmentation could bring both hardship and, occasionally, surprising local innovation in economic management.
Yet, reunification, when it came, usually required restoring the same careful, centralized economic administration Egypt had relied upon for centuries.
Even chaos, it seems, eventually settled back into familiar, patient patterns of order. Imagine a royal messenger traveling along the Nile by boat, carrying sealed reports of grain totals from a distant province toward the capital's treasury offices. Such journeys, repeated constantly across the kingdom, quietly stitched together Egypt's vast economic network, one careful report at a time. Delays or lost reports could create real confusion, forcing officials to rely on estimates until accurate information finally arrived. Yet this steady, patient flow of information allowed Egypt to function as a coherent economic whole for thousands of years. Even distance in Egypt was quietly bridged by careful, unhurried communication. Egyptian administrative titles multiplied over time, reflecting an increasingly specialized economy with distinct officials overseeing granaries, cattle, mining expeditions, and foreign trade. This specialization allowed for more efficient management as Egypt's economy grew more complex across successive dynasties. Each specialized office developed its own careful record-keeping traditions, contributing to the broader, layered bureaucracy of the kingdom.
Yet this growing complexity also required more officials, more scribes, and more careful coordination to function smoothly.
Even efficiency, it seems, quietly demanded its own patient, growing structure. Taken together, Egypt's administrative system reveals a civilization capable of managing extraordinary complexity through patient, careful, and remarkably consistent bureaucratic tradition. Viziers, treasury officials, and regional governors each played their part in a system stretching from humble village fields to the grandest royal court. This layered structure allowed Egypt to endure political upheaval, economic strain, and centuries of changing rulers while still functioning as a coherent whole. Yet, every layer of this vast system, in the end, still depended on the same quiet, patient river running through its heart. Even the greatest bureaucracy, it seems, was ultimately just another way of listening to the Nile. Cluster 10: Decline, Foreign Rule, and Egypt's Economic Legacy. As Egypt's political power weakened in later periods, its once tightly managed economy grew increasingly vulnerable to foreign influence, invasion, and shifting trade patterns. Weaker central administration made it harder to maintain the careful granary systems and tax structures that had sustained Egypt for millennia. Foreign powers, from Libyans to Nubians to Assyrians, took advantage of these vulnerabilities at various points in Egyptian history. Yet, even amid political upheaval, Egypt's underlying agricultural wealth remained remarkably resilient, continuing to attract outside interest for centuries. Even in decline, Egypt's fields never stopped quietly producing their patient, dependable harvest.
When Persian forces conquered Egypt, they quickly recognized its economic value, incorporating its grain production into a much larger imperial taxation system.
Egypt became one of the wealthiest provinces within the Persian Empire, its grain now flowing outward to support a foreign administration far beyond the Nile Valley. This shift marked a significant change, as Egyptian wealth increasingly served interests beyond its own borders for the first time in its long history. Yet, many traditional Egyptian economic practices, from grain accounting to temple management, continued quietly beneath this new foreign layer of rule. Even conquest, it seems, could not fully erase centuries of patient, local economic habit. The arrival of Alexander the Great and the subsequent Ptolemaic dynasty brought Greek economic practices, including coined money, more deeply into Egyptian daily life than ever before. Coins gradually supplemented, and eventually largely replaced, the old grain-based measures that had defined Egyptian value for thousands of years. This transition marked one of the most significant economic shifts in Egypt's entire history, blending ancient tradition with new foreign systems. Yet grain remained economically central even under Ptolemaic rule, since Egypt's fertile fields still fed much of the wider Mediterranean world. Even new coins, it seems, still ultimately represented the same old, patient harvest. Imagine an Egyptian farmer under Ptolemaic rule holding a foreign coin for the first time, turning it over curiously before returning, as always, to the familiar rhythm of the flooding fields. Greek officials now managed much of the formal taxation, yet local scribes still recorded harvests using methods passed down from their ancestors. This quiet blending of old and new economic practice reflects how deeply Egypt's agricultural traditions had settled into its cultural identity. Yet the farmer's daily life, in truth, had changed less than the shifting names of his distant rulers might suggest. Even empires rise and fall, but a well-tended field, it seems, remains a well-tended field. Alexandria, founded under Greek rule, grew into one of the ancient world's greatest trading cities, connecting Egyptian grain and goods to a vastly expanded Mediterranean economy. Ships from Alexandria carried Egyptian wheat to feed distant cities, eventually including the enormous, grain-hungry population of Rome itself. This new role transformed Egypt from an inward-focused river economy into a central pillar of a much larger imperial trading system. Yet this same importance made Egypt a highly valued prize, drawing the attention of increasingly powerful foreign empires. Even quiet, ancient grain fields, it seems, could shape the fate of empires far beyond their own horizon. This is what makes Egypt's later economic history so quietly haunting, a civilization whose ancient agricultural wisdom became, in time, a resource managed increasingly for the benefit of distant rulers. Grain that once fed local temples and workers now sailed away to feed foreign capitals hundreds of miles across the sea. Egypt's economic story shifted slowly from self-contained abundance toward serving as a vital resource within someone else's empire. Yet, the underlying discipline, the careful counting, and the patient trust in the river's rhythm never truly disappeared. Even under foreign rule, Egypt's oldest economic habits quietly endured.
When Rome eventually annexed Egypt entirely, it became known as the empire's breadbasket, its grain shipments considered essential to feeding the city of Rome itself.
Roman administrators adopted many existing Egyptian economic structures, recognizing the value of systems already refined over thousands of years. Egyptian scribes, granary systems, and even flood-based tax assessments continued functioning much as they always had, now serving a new imperial master.
Yet this arrangement placed enormous pressure on Egyptian farmers, whose harvests now carried the weight of feeding a distant, demanding capital.
Even ancient patience, it seems, could be quietly redirected toward entirely new, distant purposes. Imagine a Roman grain ship departing Alexandria's harbor, its hold filled with Egyptian wheat destined for the crowded docks of a distant Mediterranean capital. Egyptian dock workers, scribes, and sailors carried out roles their ancestors had performed for centuries, only now under an unfamiliar foreign banner. The rhythm of loading, counting, and shipping grain remained remarkably unchanged, even as the destination and the ruling power shifted dramatically. Yet somewhere upstream, a farmer still watched the horizon each summer, waiting for the same ancient flood his ancestors had always awaited. Even history's greatest shifts, it seems, rest quietly upon the same patient, unchanging fields. Egypt's economic legacy did not end with foreign rule, but quietly influenced later civilizations who studied, adapted, and admired its careful systems of measurement, storage, and administration. Roman and later Byzantine administrators drew directly on Egyptian grain management techniques, recognizing their proven effectiveness across centuries of use. Even today, historians and economists study ancient Egypt as one of history's earliest examples of large-scale, centrally managed economic planning. Yet no modern study can fully capture the quiet, patient human relationship between an entire civilization and its single, life-giving river. Even our own modern economies, in some small way, still echo this ancient, patient wisdom. Taken together, Egypt's long economic journey, from early riverside villages to imperial breadbasket, reveals a civilization defined not by conquest or coinage, but by patient, careful trust. Grain, temples, scribes, gold, and foreign trade all wove together into one of history's longest-running, most remarkably stable economic systems. Even as rulers, religions, and currencies changed across thousands of years, the quiet rhythm of the Nile's flood remained Egypt's true, unshaken foundation. Yet every civilization, however grand or ancient, eventually gives way to new rulers, new systems, and new stories built atop the old. Even so, somewhere along that same patient river, fields are still quietly, faithfully tended today. Cluster 11. Cattle, livestock, and living wealth. Long before land itself was carefully counted, Egyptian wealth was often measured simply in cattle, herds representing both food security and social prestige across the Nile Valley. Tomb paintings frequently show officials proudly overseeing long processions of cattle, sheep, and goats being tallied by attentive scribes. A large, healthy herd signaled not only wealth but careful, patient management, since livestock required steady grazing land and protection from disease. Yet herds were also vulnerable, easily lost to drought, disease, or theft, making them a riskier form of wealth than stored grain. Even living wealth, it seems, demanded its own quiet, watchful patience.
Egyptian officials conducted regular cattle counts, sometimes called cattle censuses, used partly to calculate taxation and partly to track the kingdom's overall economic health.
These counts appear in royal records dating back to the earliest dynasties, showing how central livestock was to early Egyptian administration. Some years were even named after a particularly notable cattle count, revealing just how significant this practice was to the calendar itself. Yet counting animals scattered across wide grazing lands required patience and coordination nearly as demanding as counting grain in a granary. Even something as lively as a herd of cattle could be gently folded into Egypt's love of careful order. Oxen provided essential labor for plowing fields, and a farmer fortunate enough to own a strong ox held a genuine economic advantage over neighbors without one. Renting an ox for a season was a common practice, recorded carefully in agreements much like any other economic contract. This dependence on animal labor tied Egyptian agriculture closely to the health and availability of livestock across the community. Yet an ox could fall ill, grow old, or simply be needed elsewhere, leaving a farmer suddenly without this vital help. Even the sturdiest, most reliable helper, in the end, remained a living, uncertain thing. Imagine a quiet dawn in a farming village, an ox slowly pulling a simple wooden plow while a farmer walks steadily behind, guiding the blade through soft, flood-softened soil. Nearby, a scribe might pass by on other business, glancing briefly at the scene without ever needing to record something so ordinary. Yet this ordinary moment, repeated across thousands of fields each season, quietly powered the entire Egyptian economy from its very roots. Even the grandest granary or temple, in the end, depended on this simple, patient partnership between farmer and animal. Perhaps the truest engine of Egypt's wealth was never gold at all, but this quiet, everyday labor. Sheep and goats provided wool, milk, and meat, supporting household economies in ways less dramatic than cattle but no less essential to daily survival. Smaller households often relied on these animals specifically because they required less land and care than a full-grown ox or cow. This modest form of livestock wealth allowed even humble families some measure of economic security beyond their immediate harvest. Yet these animals too remained vulnerable to disease, theft, or simple bad luck across a difficult season. Even modest wealth in Egypt required its own quiet, careful tending. This is what makes Egypt's livestock economy so quietly touching. An entire system of wealth that breathed, grazed, and occasionally wandered off, rather than sitting still in a storeroom. Herders, much like scribes and farmers, played an essential, if less celebrated, role in sustaining the kingdom's broader economic health. Their patient work, moving animals to fresh grazing land and guarding them through the night, rarely appears in grand temple inscriptions. Yet without their quiet labor, Egypt's economy of grain and gold would have rested on a far less stable foundation. Even history's quietest workers, it seems, deserve a gentle place in the story. Egyptian veterinary knowledge, preserved in fragments of ancient medical texts, shows real attention paid to animal health, treating injuries and illnesses much like human ailments. Caring for livestock, this carefully reflects just how seriously Egypt treated animals as genuine economic assets worth protecting. A sick or injured animal represented a real economic loss, worth the effort of careful, attentive treatment. Yet ancient veterinary knowledge remained limited, and many illnesses still claimed valuable animals despite the best available care. Even careful attention, in the end, could only soften nature's uncertainty, never fully remove it. Imagine a herder settling down for the night beside a resting flock. The soft sounds of animals shifting quietly in the cool evening air along the riverbank. Stars stretched overhead, the same stars his ancestors had watched over their own herds for countless generations before him. Somewhere nearby, the Nile moved quietly onward, indifferent to the small, patient life unfolding along its banks. Yet this small, patient life, repeated endlessly across the valley, quietly sustained an entire ancient civilization. Even the humblest herder, it seems, carried a small but essential thread of Egypt's economic story. Livestock also played an important role in religious and funerary economies. since cattle were frequently offered in temple sacrifices or included among grave goods for the afterlife. This dual role, as both practical wealth and sacred offering, reveals how deeply intertwined Egypt's economy and spirituality truly were. A single well-raised bull might serve a farmer's plow one season and a temple's altar the next.
Yet this sacred use also meant livestock wealth could be quietly redirected away from purely practical, everyday needs.
Even sacrifice, in Egypt, carried its own quiet economic weight. Taken together, Egypt's livestock economy reveals a civilization that measured wealth not only in stored grain and gleaming gold, but in the patient, breathing rhythm of herds moving gently across its fields. Cattle counts, careful veterinary care, and steady herding labor all quietly supported the kingdom's broader agricultural and religious life. This living form of wealth added yet another layer of patience and vulnerability to Egypt's already careful, measured economy. Yet, like everything else along the Nile, even this living wealth depended entirely on the same unhurried, generous river. Even a grazing herd, in the end, quietly followed the ancient rhythm of the flood. Cluster 12, Land Reclamation and the Engineering of Abundance. Egyptians did not simply wait passively for the Nile's flood. They actively engineered canals, basins, and dikes to guide and preserve its precious water across the widest possible stretch of farmland. This practice, known as basin irrigation, allowed floodwaters to spread evenly across fields, trapped long enough to soak deeply into the soil. Maintaining these canals required organized, cooperative labor, often coordinated at the village or regional level each year. Yet, a poorly maintained canal could waste precious floodwater, turning a modest flood into a genuinely disappointing harvest. Even abundance, in Egypt, required careful, patient engineering rather than passive hope alone. The Fayum region, fed by a channel connecting to the Nile, became one of Egypt's most ambitious land reclamation projects, especially under later Middle Kingdom rulers. Engineers worked to control water flow into this fertile basin, transforming marshland into valuable, productive farmland over successive generations. This project expanded Egypt's agricultural capacity significantly, supporting new settlements and additional grain production for the kingdom. Yet, such large-scale engineering required enormous, sustained investment of labor and resources across many years. Even new abundance, it seems, had to be patiently built before it could ever be harvested. Simple but effective tools, like the shadoof, a weighted lever used to lift water from the river into irrigation channels, gradually expanded farmers' ability to water fields beyond the flood's natural reach. This device, requiring only a steady human arm and a counterweight, allowed cultivation to continue even during drier parts of the year. Its simplicity meant even modest households could adopt it, quietly expanding what a single family might grow. Yet, lifting water this way remained slow, physically demanding work, offering only a modest supplement to the flood's far greater generosity. Even small, patient tools, it seems, could meaningfully soften nature's limits. Imagine a farmer working a shadoof at dusk, the steady creak of wood and rope marking a slow, rhythmic exchange between river and field. Bucket after bucket, water rose gently upward, filling small channels that would carry life toward rows of vegetables planted beyond the flood's natural reach. This quiet, repetitive labor, hour after hour, reflects the same patient discipline found throughout Egypt's careful, measured economy. Yet, even the most tireless effort at the Shadoof could never fully replace the Nile's own far greater natural generosity. Even human effort, it seems, worked best alongside the river, never truly in place of it. Canal maintenance required careful cooperation between neighboring landowners, since a blocked or poorly managed channel upstream could easily deprive fields further downstream of needed water. Local officials sometimes mediated disputes over water rights, applying rules and customs built up over generations of shared river management. This cooperative system, whatever its occasional disputes, allowed Egypt to sustain agriculture across a remarkably wide and complex network of channels. Yet cooperation could break down during particularly difficult years, when every household felt the pressure of a poor flood most acutely. Even shared water, it seems, required a shared, patient sense of fairness to keep flowing smoothly. This is what makes Egypt's irrigation engineering so quietly remarkable, a civilization that treated water not as something to simply endure, but as something to patiently, carefully shape toward abundance. Canals, basins, dikes, and simple lifting tools together expanded what the Nile's flood alone could naturally provide. This engineering represents one of humanity's earliest large-scale efforts to actively manage an entire river system for economic benefit. Yet every canal and dike still ultimately depended on the same generous, unpredictable flood arriving each summer. Even the cleverest engineering in Egypt remained a quiet partnership with the river, never a true mastery over it. Land reclaimed through irrigation projects was sometimes granted to soldiers, officials, or temples as a reward for service, tying new agricultural wealth directly to loyalty and administration. This practice allowed pharaohs to expand the kingdom's productive farmland, while simultaneously rewarding those who served the state well. New settlements grew around these reclaimed lands, gradually becoming established, thriving communities in their own right. Yet, integrating new land into existing tax and administrative systems required careful, patient, bureaucratic effort. Even a gift of fertile land, it seems, needed careful counting before it truly became part of the kingdom's wealth. Imagine standing at the edge of once marshy ground, now transformed into neat, productive fields after years of patient canal building and careful water management. Farmers newly settled here worked with a particular quiet pride, aware that this abundance had been deliberately built rather than simply inherited from the river alone. Nearby, officials recorded this new land's boundaries and expected yield, folding it carefully into the kingdom's broader economic records. Yet even this hard-won, engineered abundance remained subject to the same yearly uncertainty as any older, established field. Even built abundance, it seems, still bowed quietly to the same ancient, patient river. Egyptian engineers also managed drainage, preventing water from lingering too long and turning valuable farmland into unusable swamp or overly salted soil. Balancing enough water to nourish crops against too much water damaging the land required careful, ongoing observation and adjustment. This delicate balance reveals a sophisticated, practical understanding of agricultural science, developed through centuries of careful trial and observation. Yet, even experienced engineers occasionally misjudge this balance, leading to lost harvests or damaged fields in particularly difficult years. Even expertise, it seems, remained humbly subject to nature's quiet, occasional surprises. Taken together, Egypt's irrigation and land reclamation efforts reveal a civilization actively partnering with its river, rather than merely surviving at its mercy. Canals, basins, Lifting tools and careful drainage together expanded Egypt's agricultural wealth far beyond what the flood alone might naturally have offered. This patient engineering, sustained across countless generations, quietly reflects the same discipline found throughout Egypt's broader economic life. Yet every reclaimed field, every careful canal, remained ultimately a conversation with the same ancient, life-giving river. Even engineered abundance, in the end, was simply another way of listening closely to the Nile. Cluster 13, craftsmen, specialized trades, and everyday commerce. Beyond farming, Egypt supported a rich variety of skilled trades, including potters, carpenters, jewelers, and brewers, each contributing their own thread to the kingdom's broader economic fabric. Craftsmen often worked within workshops attached to temples, royal households, or wealthier private estates, receiving grain and goods as steady wages. This specialization allowed Egyptian craftsmanship to reach remarkable levels of skill, admired even by neighboring civilizations. Yet skilled craftsmen still depended entirely on stable grain supplies to sustain their own households, tying even the finest jeweler's fortune to the same uncertain flood. Even specialized skill, in Egypt, never fully escaped its dependence on the humble harvest.
Egyptian carpenters, working with relatively scarce local timber, became remarkably skilled at joining smaller pieces of wood into strong, elegant furniture and boats.
This scarcity actually encouraged clever craftsmanship, since wasting precious imported cedar or acacia wood was simply not economically sensible. Furniture found in tombs reveals joinery techniques so precise that some methods remain recognizable in fine woodworking today. Yet this reliance on imported timber tied Egyptian carpentry closely to the health of distant trade relationships, especially with Byblos. Even fine craftsmanship, it seems, depended quietly on far-off forests Egyptian hands would never personally touch. Potters produced enormous quantities of simple, practical vessels used for storing grain, oil, beer, and water across every level of Egyptian society. These humble clay containers, though rarely celebrated like gold jewelry, formed an absolutely essential part of Egypt's everyday economic infrastructure. Broken pottery shards, called ostraca, were even reused as informal writing material for quick notes, receipts, and small records. Yet producing pottery at this scale required steady access to clay, water, and fuel, resources managed carefully alongside other village needs. Even something as ordinary as a clay jar quietly carried its own small, patient economic story. Imagine a potter's workshop near a quiet village, wheels turning steadily as skilled hands shape wet clay into rows of simple, practical jars destined for granaries and kitchens alike. Nearby, a kiln glowed softly, firing the day's completed vessels under careful, watchful supervision. This modest workshop, unremarkable as it seemed, quietly supported farmers, brewers, and households across the entire surrounding region. Yet, even the most skilled potter remained dependent on the same seasonal rhythms shaping every other Egyptian trade. Even clay, shaped patiently by human hands, still followed the quiet calendar of the river. Brewing beer was both an everyday household task and a significant organized industry, since beer served as a dietary staple and, occasionally, as a form of wage payment itself. Large-scale breweries operated within temple and royal complexes, producing enormous quantities to support workers on major building projects. This steady demand made brewing a genuinely important economic activity, worthy of careful organization and record-keeping.
Yet brewing required steady grain supplies, meaning a poor harvest could quietly ripple into shortages of this everyday, essential drink.
Even something as simple as beer, it seems, carried real economic weight in ancient Egypt. This is what makes Egyptian craftsmanship so quietly fascinating. An economy where the humblest potter and the most skilled goldsmith both ultimately depended on the same careful, shared grain economy. Specialized trades allowed Egyptian society to develop remarkable skill and variety, enriching daily life well beyond simple agricultural survival. Yet no craft, however refined, could ever fully separate itself from the patient rhythms of harvest and flood underlying everything else. Even the finest jewelry and the humblest clay jar, in the end, shared the very same quiet economic root. Perhaps true craftsmanship has always meant working skillfully within limits set gently by nature itself.
Marketplaces in larger Egyptian towns brought together farmers, craftsmen, and traders, exchanging goods through careful barter based on established grain-equivalent values.
These markets, though less formal than temple or royal institutions, still played an essential role in everyday economic life across the kingdom. Vendors called out prices in terms familiar to every household, comparing fish, vegetables, and cloth against shared measures of value.
Yet these informal markets still required a baseline of trust and shared understanding to function smoothly each day.
Even the busiest, noisiest market, in the end, rested quietly on simple, patient human agreement. Imagine a bustling riverside market at midday, vendors calling gently over baskets of onions, jars of oil, and neatly folded lengths of linen cloth. A craftsman might trade a finely carved wooden comb for a week's worth of bread and beer, both sides quietly satisfied with a fair, familiar exchange. Children wove between stalls, learning early the quiet, practical rhythms of value and trade that would shape their own future livelihoods. Yet beneath this lively scene lay the same careful, patient economic logic found throughout Egypt's grander institutions. Even the smallest market exchange, it seems, echoed the same deep economic wisdom found in temple ledgers. Specialized guild-like groups of craftsmen sometimes passed skills down within families, preserving techniques across many generations of potters, weavers, or metal workers. This inherited expertise allowed certain villages or communities to become particularly renowned for specific crafts, strengthening their local economic identity. Such specialization contributed to a broader, healthy diversity within Egypt's overall economic structure.
Yet, passing skills down this way also meant opportunities could be limited for those born outside these established craft families.
Even skill, in Egypt, often quietly followed the patient inheritance of family and tradition. Taken together, Egypt's world of craftsmen and everyday commerce reveals an economy far richer and more varied than grain alone might suggest, filled with pottery, wood, cloth, and quiet daily exchange. Specialized trades added texture, skill, and diversity to Egyptian life, supporting households well beyond the immediate demands of farming. Yet every craft, however refined, remained gently tethered to the same patient agricultural rhythm underlying Egypt's entire civilization. Even the busiest marketplace, in the end, was simply another quiet expression of the Nile's steady, generous gift. Perhaps commerce itself, at its gentlest, has always been just another form of shared, patient trust. Cluster 14, the economy of eternity. Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife quietly shaped an entire branch of the economy, as households invested significant resources preparing tombs, offerings, and funerary goods meant to last forever. Even modest families set aside grain, cloth, or small valuables specifically for eventual burial preparations, treating the afterlife as a genuine long-term investment. Wealthier households commissioned elaborate tombs, employing craftsmen, painters, and priests across years of careful, patient preparation.
Yet, this spending on eternity still had to be carefully balanced against the everyday economic needs of the living.
Even eternity in Egypt required patient, practical budgeting.
An entire specialized industry grew around mummification, employing embalmers, linen wrappers, and craftsmen producing coffins, amulets, and funerary masks.
These specialists trained for years, their skills passed down carefully within particular families or temple institutions. Mummification services varied significantly in cost, allowing families across different economic levels to choose preparations matching their means. Yet, even modest mummification represented a genuine economic sacrifice for most ordinary households. Even preparing for death, it seems, followed the same careful, measured logic as everyday Egyptian life. Tomb builders and decorators formed a specialized workforce, some working for years on a single elaborate royal or noble tomb deep within the desert cliffs. This steady demand for skilled tomb labor supported entire communities, like the workers of Deir el-Medina, across many generations. Families of tomb workers often followed the same trade for generations, inheriting both skill and secretive knowledge of royal burial practices.
Yet this specialized work remained entirely dependent on continued royal and elite demand for elaborate burial preparations.
Even the quiet economy of eternity, it seems, still rose and fell with royal fortune. Imagine a painter working deep within a torchlit tomb corridor, carefully outlining scenes of farming, feasting, and daily life meant to sustain the deceased through eternity. Each brushstroke followed careful, traditional patterns passed down through generations of skilled tomb decorators. Nearby, scribes recorded exactly which materials, how much gold leaf, and how many workdays this particular tomb required. Yet even here, surrounded by images of eternal abundance, the same careful counting familiar to any granary quietly continued. Even eternity, it seems, was measured patiently, one careful brushstroke at a time. This is what makes Egypt's funerary economy so quietly haunting. An entire civilization investing enormous resources preparing for a life that none of its accountants could ever actually verify. Grain, gold, labor, and skill flowed steadily into tombs meant to outlast any single lifetime, reflecting deep cultural belief in continuity beyond death. This spending supported craftsmen, priests, and laborers, quietly weaving belief and economy into a single, seamless system. Yet this same spending also meant real resources, urgently needed by the living, were set aside instead for the promise of eternity. Even faith, it seems, has always carried a quiet, very real economic cost. Funerary goods buried with the dead, from small amulets to elaborate furniture, effectively removed real wealth from everyday circulation, a practice some later economists might find surprising. Yet, Egyptians viewed this not as waste, but as a necessary investment, ensuring comfort and status in an eternal afterlife. Tomb robbers, unsurprisingly, saw real economic opportunity in these buried treasures, leading to constant tension between burial tradition and theft.
Officials employed guards and sealed tomb entrances carefully, though history shows these measures rarely stopped determined robbers entirely.
Even eternity's careful economy, it seems, could never fully escape very earthly temptation. Imagine tomb guards patrolling quietly at night near the Valley of the Kings, torchlight flickering against carved rock faces holding centuries of buried royal wealth. Somewhere nearby, a small group might already be planning a careful, risky theft, driven by very real economic hardship in their own daily lives. This quiet tension between sacred preservation and desperate need reveals a deeply human thread running through even Egypt's most solemn traditions. Yet whatever their fate, both guard and robber depended, in the end, on the very same struggling economy surrounding them. Even sacred eternity, it seems, could never fully separate itself from ordinary human need. Priests overseeing funerary cults for deceased nobles or royalty received steady payments, often in land or grain, to maintain offerings and rituals long after burial. This arrangement created ongoing economic relationships, stretching sometimes for generations, tying living priests to the memory and wealth of the long departed. Such continuing care reflects Egypt's deep belief that proper economic support was necessary even after death itself.
Yet maintaining these arrangements over many generations required careful record-keeping, ensuring promised support never quietly lapsed.
Even memory in Egypt required its own patient, ongoing economic care. Taken together, Egypt's economy of eternity reveals just how deeply belief and commerce intertwined throughout Egyptian civilization, extending economic thinking even beyond the boundary of death itself. Tombs, mummification, funerary goods, and ongoing priestly care together formed a substantial, enduring branch of Egypt's broader economic life. This careful investment in the afterlife reflects the same patient, measured discipline found throughout every other part of Egyptian society. Yet even this most sacred spending remained, in the end, built from the same humble grain and quiet labor as everything else. Perhaps even eternity, in Egypt, was simply another patient harvest, gathered carefully for a season yet to come. Cluster 15, Frontiers, Fortresses, and the Cost of Protection. Protecting Egypt's wealth required more than granaries and scribes. It also required fortresses, garrisons, and organized military expenditure along the kingdom's vulnerable frontiers. Fortified outposts along the southern border with Nubia protected valuable gold routes, while eastern defenses guarded against incursions from the Sinai and beyond. Maintaining these fortresses required steady supplies of grain, tools, and manpower, forming a significant ongoing expense for the royal treasury. Yet without this protection, Egypt's carefully accumulated wealth, from gold to grain, remained vulnerable to raids and disruption. Even security, it seems, required its own quiet, patient investment.
Egyptian fortresses along the Nile's southern frontier, such as those near the Second Cataract, were remarkably sophisticated, complete with granaries, workshops, and housing for soldiers and their families.
These outposts functioned almost like small, self-sufficient towns, blending military purpose with everyday economic life. Soldiers stationed here received regular grain rations, much like workers anywhere else in the Egyptian economy. Yet supplying these remote fortresses required long, difficult journeys, adding real cost and effort to the kingdom's broader logistics. Even distant defense, it seems, still depended on the same careful counting familiar to any granary closer to home. Military campaigns, when they occurred, required enormous economic mobilization, from provisioning soldiers to transporting supplies across considerable distances. Successful campaigns sometimes returned with valuable tribute, captives, or resources, offsetting some of the initial economic investment. Yet unsuccessful or prolonged campaigns could strain the treasury significantly, diverting grain and labor away from domestic needs.
This delicate calculation, weighing potential gain against real economic risk, shaped much of Egypt's foreign policy throughout its history.
Even warfare in ancient Egypt remained ultimately bound by careful, patient economic arithmetic. Imagine a supply convoy moving slowly along a desert trade route, donkeys laden with grain and water destined for a distant frontier garrison. Soldiers there depended entirely on this steady, patient supply line continuing without serious interruption. A delayed shipment, caused by weather, distance, or simple misfortune, could quietly strain morale among soldiers far from home. Yet this same quiet logistics, repeated tirelessly across the kingdom's frontiers, kept Egypt's wider economy safely protected. Even the loneliest outpost, it seems, remained gently tethered to the same patient river far behind it. This is what makes Egypt's frontier economy so quietly sobering. Genuine wealth requiring genuine protection, and genuine protection always carrying its own real, ongoing cost. Fortresses, garrisons, and military campaigns together represent a significant, often underappreciated portion of Egypt's overall economic story. This investment allowed trade routes, gold mines, and farmland to remain productive and secure across many generations. Yet every soldier fed, every fortress supplied, quietly drew from the same limited grain reserves needed elsewhere in the kingdom. Even peace and prosperity, it seems, have always rested upon careful, patient, and sometimes costly vigilance.
Diplomatic marriages between Egyptian pharaohs and foreign royal families sometimes served as an alternative, less costly way to secure peaceful borders and stable trade relationships.
Such alliances, recorded carefully in royal correspondence, often accompanied exchanges of valuable gifts meant to reinforce mutual trust. This approach allowed Egypt to sometimes avoid the heavier economic burden of prolonged military campaigns along contested frontiers.
Yet these alliances required their own careful, ongoing diplomatic investment, including regular gifts and correspondence to maintain goodwill.
Even peace, it seems, required its own patient, careful cultivation. Imagine a royal scribe carefully composing a diplomatic letter, promising gifts of gold and grain in exchange for continued peace along a distant, contested border. Such letters, preserved on fragile clay tablets, reveal just how deliberately Egypt balanced military strength against patient, careful diplomacy. Every promised gift represented a real cost, weighed carefully against the far greater expense of open conflict. Yet even the most carefully worded letter could not entirely guarantee lasting peace along a distant, uncertain frontier. Even diplomacy, in ancient Egypt, remained a quiet, ongoing act of patient hope. Frontier trade itself required careful economic management, since goods moving across borders needed inspection, taxation, and protection from local officials stationed at key crossing points. These border posts functioned much like early customs offices, recording goods entering and leaving Egyptian territory. This careful oversight allowed Egypt to benefit economically from frontier trade while still maintaining security and order.
Yet, overly strict controls could sometimes discourage valuable trade, requiring officials to balance security against economic opportunity.
Even a well-guarded border, it seems, needed a gentle, patient hand alongside its watchful eye. Taken together, Egypt's frontier economy reveals a civilization carefully balancing security, diplomacy, and trade across its vulnerable edges, protecting the patient wealth built up along its central river. Fortresses, campaigns, diplomatic marriages, and border trade together formed a complex, ongoing investment in Egypt's long-term stability. This careful balance allowed the quieter economic life of farmers, scribes, and craftsmen to continue largely undisturbed at the kingdom's heart. Yet every frontier, however carefully managed, remained a reminder that even the most patient civilization needed constant, gentle vigilance. Even Egypt's widest borders, in the end, existed simply to protect the same quiet fields where it had always begun. Cluster 16: Law, Contracts, and Economic Justice. Egyptian law took economic disputes seriously, with courts hearing cases over unpaid debts, disputed land boundaries, and broken labor agreements. Local councils, sometimes called kenbet, gathered to hear evidence, review written contracts, and issue judgments meant to restore fairness between disputing parties. These courts relied heavily on written records, meaning a well-kept contract could make the difference between winning or losing a case. Yet justice still depended on the honesty of witnesses and officials, and clever manipulation of records was not unheard of. Even the most careful legal system, it seems, still rested on ordinary human integrity.
Surviving court records describe disputes over inherited land, unpaid grain loans, and even disagreements over shared irrigation access between neighboring farmers.
Judges weighed testimony carefully, sometimes calling multiple witnesses to confirm the details of a contested transaction. Penalties for proven dishonesty could include repayment with additional grain, loss of disputed property, or physical punishment in more serious cases. Yet many disputes likely never reached formal courts at all, settled instead quietly between neighbors or through a village elder's guidance. Even formal justice, in Egypt, existed alongside countless smaller, gentler resolutions. Marketplace weights and measures were periodically inspected by officials specifically tasked with preventing fraud in everyday trade. A merchant caught using a shaved or falsely marked weight faced real penalties, since dishonest measure threatened the trust underlying the entire economy. These inspections reflect how seriously Egypt treated fairness in even the smallest daily transactions.
Yet enforcement varied across regions and periods, and clever cheats sometimes still slipped through despite these careful checks.
Even honesty, it seems, required constant, patient tending, like any other part of the Egyptian economy. Imagine a marketplace inspector moving quietly between stalls, comparing a trader's weights against a small, official set carried carefully in a wooden box. Most traders welcomed this scrutiny calmly, confident their measures were true, while a few grew visibly nervous as the inspector approached. A single dishonest weight, discovered publicly, could damage a trader's reputation for years within a tightly connected community. Yet most days passed uneventfully, honest measure quietly reassuring both buyer and seller alike. Even trust, in a busy market, was built one small, careful weighing at a time. This is what makes Egyptian economic law so quietly reassuring, a system that treated fairness in trade as something worth protecting through formal courts, careful inspection, and written record. Contracts, witnesses, and judges together formed a structure allowing ordinary Egyptians real recourse when agreements were broken. This legal framework gave everyday economic life a stability rare among many ancient societies. Yet law alone could never fully replace the quieter, everyday trust that made most transactions unfold smoothly without ever needing a judge. Even the most careful legal system, in the end, depended on countless small, honest exchanges never recorded at all.
Inheritance disputes appear frequently in surviving Egyptian legal records, often involving disagreements between siblings over land, livestock, or household goods left by a parent.
Egyptian inheritance customs generally divided property among children, though eldest children, or those who had cared for aging parents, sometimes received a larger share. Written wills, when they existed, helped prevent some disputes, though many families still relied on informal, spoken agreements. Yet, even careful planning could not always prevent hard feelings when valuable land or livestock was finally divided. Even family, it seems, needed its own patient, careful economic diplomacy. Women in Egypt held notable legal and economic rights compared to many other ancient societies, able to own property, initiate legal cases, and manage their own financial affairs. Court records show women bringing cases over disputed inheritance, unpaid debts, or broken contracts, treated with the same legal seriousness as men. This relative independence allowed some women considerable economic influence within their households and communities. Yet broader social and religious structures still generally favored men in higher administrative and priestly roles. Even so, Egyptian women's quiet economic agency stands out clearly across these ancient records. Imagine a woman standing calmly before a local council, presenting a written contract proving a debt owed to her late husband's household, now rightfully hers to collect. The judges listened carefully, checking her evidence against their own careful records before ruling in her favor. Such moments, quietly recorded on fragile papyrus, reveal a surprisingly practical respect for economic fairness, regardless of gender. Yet each case still depended on the particular judges present, and outcomes were never entirely guaranteed. Even justice, however carefully structured, always carried a small, human element of uncertainty. Scribes trained specifically in legal writing helped ordinary Egyptians draft contracts, wills, and court petitions, making formal economic protection accessible even to those who could not read or write themselves. This service, available for a modest fee, extended the benefits of Egypt's legal and economic system well beyond the wealthy or educated elite. Such accessibility helped maintain broad trust in the fairness of everyday economic dealings across Egyptian society.
Yet those unable to afford even modest scribal fees sometimes found themselves at a real disadvantage in disputes.
Even fairness, it seems, was never entirely free of its own quiet, practical cost. Taken together, Egypt's economic legal system reveals a civilization deeply invested in protecting fairness, whether through royal courts, marketplace inspectors, or humble local councils. Contracts, witnesses, inheritance customs, and accessible scribal services together formed a surprisingly thorough framework supporting everyday economic trust. This careful structure allowed Egypt's economy to function smoothly across generations, even amid inevitable disputes and disagreements. Yet every law, every court, in the end, simply protected the same quiet, patient trust underlying every Egyptian transaction. Even justice, it seems, was just another careful way of tending the harvest of human trust. Cluster 17: Household Budgets and Everyday Family Economics. Beyond grand temples and royal treasuries, Egypt's economy ultimately rested on countless individual households carefully managing their own modest grain, cloth, and small valuables. A typical household budgeted grain rations across an entire year, setting some aside for seed, some for daily meals, and some for unexpected needs. This careful domestic planning mirrored, on a much smaller scale, the same discipline found in the kingdom's largest granaries. Yet a single poor harvest could quickly strain even the most carefully managed household budget. Even the humblest home, it seems, practiced its own quiet form of patient economics. Household economic records, preserved on broken pottery shards, sometimes list surprisingly detailed daily expenses, from bread and beer to small luxuries like scented oil. These informal notes reveal ordinary Egyptians tracking their own spending much as any careful household might today. Such records suggest basic numeracy and economic planning extended well beyond scribes and officials into everyday family life. Yet not every household could read or write, meaning many depended on memory, custom, or a literate neighbor's occasional help. Even without writing, most families still carried their own quiet, practical sense of value and fair exchange. Women frequently managed household finances directly, overseeing grain stores, textile production, and small-scale trade of surplus goods within their communities. A skilled weaver might sell extra linen cloth to neighbors, quietly supplementing her household's broader economic security. This domestic economic role gave many Egyptian women real, practical influence over their family's daily well-being. Yet this responsibility also meant women often bore significant pressure during difficult economic periods, stretching limited resources as far as possible. Even quiet household management, it seems, required its own patient, careful skill. Imagine a mother sitting quietly in the evening, sorting small measures of grain into separate baskets for bread, beer, and next season's planting. Her children nearby watched carefully, slowly learning through simple observation the same careful economic habits she had learned from her own mother. This quiet, repeated lesson, passed gently from one generation to the next, sustained Egyptian household economics across centuries. Yet, even the most careful household planning could not fully protect a family from a truly difficult flood season. Even love, in its own quiet way, was expressed through careful, patient budgeting. This is what makes Egyptian household economics so quietly moving. The same careful discipline found in royal treasuries, gently echoed in a single family's modest grain baskets. Everyday budgeting, careful trade, and patient planning allowed ordinary families to navigate an economy shaped entirely by the Nile's yearly mood. This quiet resilience, repeated across countless households, ultimately formed the true foundation of Egypt's entire economic strength. Yet, behind every careful family budget lay the same quiet, ever-present hope for a kind and generous flood. Even the grandest civilization, in the end, was simply many small households, patiently managing their own quiet harvest.
Marriage in ancient Egypt often included practical economic agreements, with both families contributing goods, land, or livestock to help the new household establish itself.
Written marriage contracts, when used, specified what each party brought to the union and what would happen to property if the marriage later ended. Such careful planning reflects a very practical Egyptian approach to combining personal relationships with economic security. Yet these arrangements still depended on both families honoring their promises over time, much like any other economic contract. Even love and partnership in Egypt were gently woven together with careful, practical planning. Children were often expected to contribute economically to the household from a fairly young age, helping with simple farming tasks, herding, or craft work alongside their parents. This early economic participation taught practical skills while also directly supporting the family's overall livelihood. Wealthier families might instead send sons to scribal schools, investing in future economic opportunity rather than immediate household labor. Yet most families simply could not afford this kind of long-term educational investment, relying instead on every available hand in the fields. Even childhood in ancient Egypt quietly carried its own gentle economic responsibility. Imagine a young child walking carefully alongside an older sibling, carrying a small basket of gleaned grain left behind after the main harvest had already been gathered. Every small handful mattered, contributing quietly to the household's overall store against the coming months. Such modest, patient effort, repeated across countless families, added up to a genuinely significant portion of Egypt's total agricultural economy. Yet this same child likely never realized just how deeply his small basket connected to the kingdom's much larger, careful system of counting and storage. Even the smallest hands, it seems, quietly helped carry Egypt's ancient economy forward. Elderly family members were generally cared for within the household economy itself, supported by grain and goods contributed by working children in a quiet, ongoing exchange across generations. This arrangement functioned as Egypt's informal version of retirement security, long before any formal pension system existed anywhere in the world. Caring for elders was considered both a moral and practical economic duty, reinforced through religious teaching and social custom alike. Yet families facing genuine hardship sometimes struggled to fully support both young children and aging elders at once. Even care for the elderly in Egypt rested quietly on the same patient, shared harvest as everything else. Taken together, Egypt's household economics reveal a civilization where careful, patient planning existed at every level, from the grandest royal treasury down to the humblest family's grain basket. Budgeting, trade, marriage agreements, and care across generations together formed the quiet, everyday foundation supporting Egypt's much larger economic story. This layered consistency, from smallest household to greatest kingdom, reflects a truly unified economic culture built around shared, patient values. Yet every household, however carefully managed, still depended entirely on the same generous, unpredictable river shaping the whole of Egyptian life. Even the quietest family budget, in the end, was simply another small, hopeful conversation with the Nile. Cluster 18. Scribal schools, numeracy, and the value of knowledge. Formal education in ancient Egypt centered heavily on scribal schools, where young students learned reading, writing, and the careful arithmetic needed for economic administration. Students practiced copying model texts for years, gradually mastering the hundreds of hieroglyphic and hieratic signs required for professional scribal work. This education represented a genuine economic investment for families able to afford it, promising a more secure, respected future for their sons. Yet scribal training required years of disciplined study, and not every student successfully completed the demanding curriculum. Even knowledge in Egypt required its own patient, careful cultivation. Egyptian mathematics, though different from modern methods, allowed scribes to calculate areas of irregular fields, volumes of granaries, and fair divisions of grain among many workers. Surviving mathematical papyri include practical problems clearly drawn from real economic situations, like dividing loaves of bread fairly among a set number of people. This practical mathematics directly supported taxation, construction planning, and daily commerce across the entire kingdom. Yet mastering these calculations required years of patient practice, available mainly to those with time and resources to dedicate toward formal study. Even numbers, it seems, carried their own quiet, careful discipline. Scribal students often copied moral teachings alongside their practical lessons, texts emphasizing honesty, diligence, and fair dealing as essential scribal virtues. These teachings linked economic administration directly to personal character, suggesting Egyptians viewed honest accounting as a moral, not merely technical responsibility. A scribe known for fairness and accuracy could build a respected, economically secure career across an entire lifetime. Yet temptation toward dishonesty remained a constant undercurrent, addressed repeatedly in these same moral teaching texts. Even careful counting, it seems, was understood as a quiet test of character. Imagine a scribal classroom at dawn, young students seated cross-legged on woven mats, reed pens ready beside small pots of carefully mixed ink. A teacher read slowly from a model text, students repeating and copying each phrase with careful, practiced concentration. Outside, the ordinary rhythms of village life continued, farmers heading to their fields, unaware that these quiet students would one day help manage that very same harvest. Yet each student still depended, ultimately, on that same harvest to fund the very education shaping their future. Even knowledge in Egypt grew patiently from the same fertile ground as everything else. This is what makes Egyptian scribal education so quietly inspiring. A civilization that recognized, thousands of years ago, how deeply literacy and numeracy could shape economic opportunity and security. Scribes trained this way became essential to taxation, trade, law, and administration across every level of Egyptian society. This investment in education helped sustain one of history's longest-running, most consistently organized economic systems. Yet, access to this education remained limited, meaning many talented Egyptians never had the chance to develop skills that might have served the kingdom well. Even opportunity, it seems, has always depended partly on patient, fortunate circumstance.
A small number of talented scribes rose from modest beginnings into genuinely influential administrative positions, their careers celebrated in later Egyptian tradition as proof that skill could sometimes outweigh birth.
Such stories, whether entirely accurate or partly idealized, reveal a cultural value placed on merit alongside inherited status. These successful scribes often expressed gratitude toward their teachers, reinforcing the respected, almost sacred status of education within Egyptian culture. Yet such dramatic rises likely remain the exception rather than the common experience for most students. Even opportunity's rare exceptions, it seems, still shaped how an entire society valued careful learning. Numeracy extended beyond scribes into everyday craft and trade, as builders, weavers, and merchants all relied on practical measurement and calculation in their daily work. A builder needed careful proportion to construct a stable wall, while a weaver needed careful counting to keep patterns consistent across a length of cloth. This widespread practical numeracy, even without formal schooling, quietly supported Egypt's broader economic sophistication. Yet, formal scribal mathematics still offered a level of precision and record-keeping beyond what informal, practical knowledge alone could achieve. Even the humblest craft, it seems, carried its own quiet, careful mathematics. Imagine an aging scribe, now retired from active service, quietly teaching his own grandson the same careful signs and calculations he had once learned as a boy. Reed pen in small, careful hands, the child practiced patiently, repeating lessons passed down now across 3 generations of the same family. This quiet continuity, repeated in scribal families across the kingdom, helped preserve Egypt's economic knowledge across many centuries of change. Yet, each generation still had to patiently relearn and rebuild this knowledge anew, one careful lesson at a time. Even memory, it seems, required constant, gentle renewal to truly last. Taken together, Egypt's scribal education reveals a civilization that understood, remarkably early, the deep connection between careful learning and lasting economic strength. Numeracy, literacy, and moral teaching together shaped generations of administrators capable of managing one of history's most enduring, sophisticated economies. This investment in knowledge, however unevenly distributed, quietly supported everything from grain taxation to monumental construction across thousands of years. Yet even the most brilliant scribe remained, in the end, simply another careful steward of the same ancient, patient river's generous gift. Even wisdom, in Egypt, was ultimately just another quiet way of tending the harvest. Cluster 19, grain measurement, nilometers, and ancient forecasting. Precise grain measurement stood at the very center of Egyptian economic life, with standard units like the hecat allowing consistent comparison across the entire kingdom. Officials used carefully calibrated containers to measure grain, ensuring a hecat in one province matched a hecat in another. This consistency allowed taxation, wages, and trade to function fairly across a kingdom stretching hundreds of miles along the Nile. Yet, maintaining this consistency required constant vigilance, since worn or mismatched containers could quietly distort careful calculations over time. Even something as simple as a grain measure, it seems, demanded patient, careful attention.
Nilometers, structures built to measure the Nile's rising water, allowed Egyptian officials to forecast harvest quality and adjust tax expectations well before the grain was even planted.
These stone structures, marked with careful measurement lines, were checked regularly during flood season by dedicated officials. A favorable reading brought quiet relief across the kingdom, while a disappointing one prompted early planning for possible hardship ahead. Yet even the most careful nilometer reading could not fully predict how a season's harvest would ultimately unfold. Even ancient forecasting, it seems, still left room for patient, hopeful uncertainty. Officials compared each year's nilometer readings against decades of previous records, building a long, careful memory of the river's habits and tendencies. This historical record allowed Egypt to distinguish an unusually low flood from a normal seasonal variation, informing wiser economic decisions. Such careful record-keeping represents an early, practical form of long-term economic planning based on patient observation.
Yet the river, however well studied, always retained some capacity to surprise even the most experienced official.
Even long memory in Egypt bowed humbly before the Nile's quiet unpredictability. Imagine an official descending narrow stone steps toward the water's edge, lamp in hand, checking the flood's height against carefully carved measurement marks. Behind him, a scribe waited patiently, ready to record the day's reading alongside notes from previous years for careful comparison. This quiet, repeated ritual, performed faithfully every flood season, connected each year's harvest to centuries of careful, patient observation before it. Yet no matter how many years of records existed, this year's true harvest still remained, for now, a patient mystery. Even careful history, it seems, could only prepare the mind, never fully calm the heart. This is what makes Egyptian forecasting so quietly remarkable. A civilization that turned careful, patient observation into genuine, practical economic planning, thousands of years before formal economics existed. Nilometers, grain measures, and long historical records together allowed Egypt to anticipate, rather than merely react to, its economic fortunes. This foresight helped smooth the sharp edges of an economy otherwise entirely dependent on a single, unpredictable river. Yet, even the most careful forecast still left room for genuine hope, worry, and quiet waiting each season. Even prediction, in the end, was simply another patient conversation with the river.
Some Egyptian officials became renowned specifically for their skill in reading nilometers and advising on grain policy, their reputations built on years of careful, accurate judgment.
Such officials were valued advisors to regional governors and even the royal court itself during uncertain seasons. Their advice shaped decisions about tax relief, granary reserves, and even the timing of major building projects.
Yet even the most respected advisor could still be wrong, and history records seasons where careful predictions still fell short of reality.
Even expertise, it seems, remained humbly subject to nature's quiet, occasional surprises. Imagine a regional governor listening carefully as a trusted advisor described this year's flood measurements, weighing the news quietly before deciding how much grain to release from the local granary. Every word carried real economic weight, since a miscalculated decision could mean either wasted surplus or unnecessary hardship for an entire district. Such quiet, careful conversations, repeated across the kingdom each season, shaped the daily economic reality of thousands of ordinary families. Yet even the wisest decisions still depended, ultimately, on forces well beyond any single official's control. Even governance, in Egypt, remained a patient partnership with uncertainty itself. Egyptian record-keeping extended across dynasties, with some administrative traditions and measurement standards persisting remarkably unchanged for well over 1,000 years. This continuity gave later officials access to an extraordinarily long, patient historical record for comparison and planning. Few ancient civilizations maintained such consistent economic record-keeping across so many centuries of changing rulers and circumstances. Yet this same continuity meant outdated assumptions could sometimes persist longer than they perhaps should have. Even tradition, it seems, required occasional, careful reconsideration alongside its patient consistency. Taken together, Egypt's careful measurement of grain and floodwater reveals a civilization that transformed patient observation into genuine, practical economic wisdom. Nilometers, standardized measures, and long historical records together allowed Egypt to plan, forecast, and adjust with remarkable sophistication for its time. This careful foresight softened, though never eliminated, the uncertainty inherent in an economy built entirely around a single river's mood. Yet every forecast, however carefully calculated, still ended in the same quiet, patient waiting shared by farmer and official alike. Even the most careful measurement, in the end, was simply another way of respectfully listening to the Nile. Cluster 20. Reflections on an economy built from patience. Looking back across Egypt's long economic history, one quality stands out above all others: an extraordinary, unhurried patience woven into every institution, from the humblest household to the grandest royal treasury. Farmers waited patiently for floods, officials waited patiently for harvests, and scribes patiently recorded each season's quiet outcome. This patience allowed an entire civilization to endure uncertainty without collapsing into chaos, season after season, for thousands of years. Yet this same patience also meant Egyptian life moved at a pace very different from our own hurried, modern rhythms. Even prosperity, it seems, has always required its own quiet, unhurried timing.
Modern economists studying ancient Egypt often note how remarkably stable its core economic structures remained across dynasties, wars, and even foreign conquest.
Grain-based taxation, careful record-keeping, and temple redistribution persisted, in some form, for well over 2,000 years of Egyptian history. Few civilizations in human history can claim such a long, continuous economic tradition, adapting gently rather than collapsing entirely under changing circumstances. Yet this same stability sometimes made Egypt slower to adopt new economic innovations, like coined currency, compared to some neighboring civilizations. Even strength, it seems, sometimes carries a quiet cost in flexibility. Egypt's economic story reminds us that wealth has never truly been only about gold, coins, or modern financial instruments, but about trust, patience, and careful shared effort. Grain, measured honestly and shared fairly, sustained an entire civilization for millennia without ever needing a single minted coin. This quiet lesson feels surprisingly relevant even now, in a world that sometimes forgets how much of value still rests on simple human trust. Yet trust, then as now, always remained fragile, requiring constant, gentle maintenance across every generation. Even ancient wisdom, it seems, still has something quiet to teach us today. Imagine, for a final moment, the whole sweep of Egyptian history laid gently along the banks of a single, patient river, flood after flood, harvest after harvest, century after century. Farmers, scribes, priests, officials, and rulers all played their small, patient part in a story far larger than any single lifetime. Empires rose and fell along its banks, yet the quiet rhythm of planting, waiting, and harvesting never truly paused. Even now, somewhere along that same ancient river, fields are still gently tended, much as they always have been. Perhaps this is the truest treasure Egypt ever built, not gold, but patience itself. This is what makes Egypt's economic legacy so quietly enduring, proof that careful measurement, shared trust, and patient planning can sustain a civilization far longer than any single ruler or dynasty. Its granaries, scribes, and careful records outlasted countless kings, wars, and foreign conquerors across thousands of years. This resilience offers a gentle, timeless reminder that true wealth is built slowly, through patient, honest effort, repeated quietly across generations. Yet even this ancient wisdom eventually gave way to new rulers, new systems, and new stories layered gently atop the old. Even the longest river, in the end, keeps flowing quietly onward, carrying each new chapter gently forward. As we let this long, slow history settle now into quiet memory, perhaps what remains clearest is simply this: an entire civilization built patiently around trust, measurement, and a single generous river. Grain counted honestly, debts settled fairly, and wealth shared carefully sustained Egypt across an almost unimaginable stretch of time. There is something deeply calming in remembering how much of lasting value has always come from patience rather than haste. Yet even this calm understanding, gently carried forward, remains only one small reflection on a civilization far too vast for any single night to fully capture. Even so, tonight's quiet journey along the Nile is, for now, gently complete. As we come to the end of tonight's journey, let the whole slow shape of it settle quietly over you, like silt easing down after a gentle flood. We began beside a single river, watching farmers wait patiently for water, and we followed that patience all the way into granaries, temples, and scribal offices humming with careful counting. We walked through villages of skilled workers rationed in bread and beer, and we sailed outward, in our minds, toward Nubia's gold and Punt's incense, and Byblos's tall cedar trees. We sat quietly beside viziers and treasury officials, watching an entire kingdom balance itself, season after season, against the same uncertain flood. And we followed Egypt gently into its later years, its grain still flowing steadily, even as new rulers, new coins, and new languages settled over the same old, patient fields. Through it all, one truth remained constant: an entire civilization built not on gold alone, but on trust, measurement, and the quiet discipline of patient people. If tonight's slow journey through Egypt's ancient economy helped ease you toward sleep, there is another quiet story waiting for you whenever you're ready, resting gently in this channel for another night. A calm like, a gentle subscribe, or a quiet comment always helps more of these unhurried histories find their way to other tired minds looking for rest. For now, let your jaw soften and let your shoulders melt a little further into the stillness around you. Let your breathing slow, unhurried, like the Nile easing gently over its banks after a long, patient year. Picture soft lamplight fading in a quiet scribe's office, papyrus rolled closed, ink resting undisturbed until morning. Let that same stillness settle over you now, gentle and unhurried, as the night grows deep and quiet around you. Sleep well, and good night.